Welcome to the Cinefleur Podcast. Here we invite guests from across the floral and plant industry to share their stories and insights. Our aim is to equip you with valuable perspectives, trends and inspiration that will elevate your personal and professional growth. I'm your host, Amanda Payne. Our guest today was introduced to the flower and plant industry when he was just 5 years old. He's a self-professed plant geek and was listed in the Sunday Times top 20 most influential people in the gardening world. He keeps busy traveling the world in search of new plants, fueled by his passion for all things green. Mr. Plant Geek himself, Michael Perry.
Hey, good to meet you today.
Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me on the podcast.
Let's jump right in. We'd like to start with a highlight or interesting quote from our guest. You once said the following about growing plants and working with plants. Many of us keep on growing the same plants but with poor results. That's what it's all about, making gardening easier, more pleasurable, and making sure you've got something different from your neighbours. Is that a sentence, is that the essence of the plant industry?
Yeah, this is really coming from my backdrop of introducing brand new plants and showing that the industry kind of, especially like the media and the consumers are not aware of the new plants and developments. And there's a reason that we breed new plants, to grow better, to give better results, to give the consumer more confidence. So that was really coming from a standpoint that we're not celebrating new developments enough and supporting the industry and going forward. So we should really be showing consumers what's new, what's exciting, be proud of what we've got to show them as well.
I agree. So can you tell us in your own words what it is that you do?
It's really hard to describe because it's what would you call that these days? Multi-hyphenate, I believe. Yeah, a mixed portfolio of work.
Multidisciplinary.
So, yeah, that's a good one. So I'll give you a backdrop right to my childhood because that kind of then pulls together to today. So like when I was a kid, you're right, I was exposed to plants at a really young age, gardening with my grandparents, parents as well. My grandparents were running like a really big greenhouse, not professional like in the Netherlands, but kind of like selling at the local market, kind of like selling at the end of the driveway, growing chrysanthemums, dahlias, kind of
Lovely.
All of the traditional things. It was kind of like, I guess, the early 80s at that point. And so I kind of picked up from them the love of plants, but also the love of money and entrepreneurialism as well, because I could see that they were, selling things, making money, kind of like wheeling and dealing, we would call it in UK. And I loved that. And I loved that plants kind of opened up that world and it felt really exciting. I love the plants, not only as a plant, but as a product as well at that stage. And yeah, I was learning from my grandparents. When I was 12 years old, I was selling myself at the end of the driveway. I set up a little herb nursery, selling herbs through mail order. And then went to college for 2 years, a national diploma in horticulture. And then after that, got a job with Thompson & Morgan, which is a mail order plant brand. And there I was working on promotional materials, marketing around plants again. So again, seeing plants as a product as well as appreciating for, the real thing that they are too. And so now I've been freelance for about 7-8 years. And a lot of that is now connecting industry with consumer, because I've become quite known in the industry, got a lot of contacts in the press, etc., coupled off with like social media, building a following there, being able to show the consumer what's happening in the industry, to then kind of justify the price of plants, kind of inspire them to buy new plants that we spoke about briefly earlier, but also to give the industry that insight into what the consumer really wants. Because sometimes I feel like there's so many parts of the chain and it's a bit like kind of like it gets lost in translation along the way sometimes. So as much as I can bring industry to consumer, I want to do that. So I create a lot of different content for bigger breeding companies. Like they'll give me a plant like Princettia and I'll then create some interesting content that the consumer is excited by, but also the industry feels it uplifts the product as well. So that's one part of my role. Also presenting at events or workshops, demonstrations, hosting, basically talking about plants. So new, different, unusual plants, and do various different TV, radio in the UK as well. And basically whatever comes up. And when we were sitting outside before we came on the podcast, we said, you just say yes to everything. And that's how it pushes you forward and pushes your comfort zone and gives you new perspectives as well. So I'm
new
just
audiences.
Always sat here saying yes.
Lovely. Just going back quickly to your working days at Thompson & Morgan, you were known as a plant hunter, helping to source new plants for the company's seed catalogue. What was it you were looking for in those days?
So yeah, it was quite an unusual role. It was really bringing in the brand new variety. So it was really looking at a plant that was unusual, could give results to the consumer. So maybe it was new breeding that is then more disease resistant or flowering for longer. Maybe interesting new color, new genetics, that sort of stuff. And it was really pulling together the whole package. So getting a good picture, getting a photo for mail order is so different to getting purely a picture of a plant, because you need to have something that looks good on the page but still seems realistic but isn't too artistic. So that was a real skill in itself, the photography. But also, of course, you've only got one opportunity to get the attention. So you needed a good USP, like a unique selling point, good copy as well.
Yep.
Pricing as well. Pricing came into it. So it really was the whole package of promoting a plant. And so that gave me a lot of experience in being able to, sell plants to people and give people reasons to choose new plants as well. So it was a really, really interesting role for sure.
Yeah, and you're not only thinking about the consumer, but also about the florists, gardeners, and garden centres, I guess.
Well, mail order was just for mail order catalogues, like sent out to consumers at home. But of course, what actually was very interesting, I'll drop that in here actually, we were able to take our pick of the products that were coming through, because when you choose products for garden centres, that is very commercial. And the plants, like if you think about how things look in a garden centre, they need to be small plants, they're in flower, right time of year, they need to be very efficient and fit as many onto a Danish trolley as possible. So that actually, there's a lot of rules when it comes to choosing a plant for a garden centre. So working in the mail order industry, we actually had the pick of the crop, because we were selling baby plants, so little plug plants.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter how big they were or how good they looked on the garden centre shelf, because the consumer grew it on themselves. So very often we would pick up on a lot of plants that had been rejected from the garden centres that would work well in mail order. So it was really a very exciting role, and we could offer things that were in much lower quantities than the garden centre. And it's such a unique industry, mail order, which is like, I think, quite underrated as well, because it's very, very interesting world, and you can really, as a consumer, buy something very unique that you cannot buy in the shops. So I feel like garden centres and mail order and TV shopping as well, that I deal in a little bit, they don't really compete with each other, because they're very different plants that are available to very different consumers as well. So it's a really fun world, and I'm so happy to be here today and talk about that mail order industry, because it's quite unseen really. Yeah.
Going further into that, could you tell us a bit about your first experience doing this? You just said it was in Zeeland?
Yeah, definitely. So that was selecting brand new plants. So my first job was to go out and select the new varieties. So the very first trip was to Zeeland, so to Sahin, which is one of the biggest seed companies, now part of Taki as well. And it was to choose those varieties, and we would choose them in the field, we would name them, we would get the photography, we would find the selling points, and it's so much fun. And I was then doing that role in one way or another for like 18 years too. And we used to also pull in a lot of new varieties from consumers. And I remember also in the first week, I didn't just come to Holland, but we also drove to London to collect a black flowered delphinium that had popped up in a customer's garden. So when it comes to selecting new plants, it wasn't just about what bigger breeding companies were producing. It was also about observation of, home gardeners. And there's a foxglove out there that we released called Primrose Carousel in 1999. And it was on the front of our seed catalogue. And that was a foxglove digitalis that has flowers all around the stem. And that's very unique, because usually they're on one side, like a gladioli. And I'm fairly sure that all the genetics that are now released of digitalis with flowers all around the stem come back to that customer's garden in Suffolk. And that is where, new plants pop up in the strangest of places. And a lot of new plants have amazing journeys too. Yeah. And that is a lot of what I cover in the content that I still produce to this day as well. So I've always been fascinated in treating a plant as a product, and really, and we were also talking earlier as we had a coffee this is not, my role is not something you ever could have learned at college, because it's kind of marketing of plants. And I don't know if that course really exists in that way, because it's quite a niche as well. And even when you drill that down to mail order as well, and now the internet, and also, I do a lot of presenting for TV shopping in the UK. That's a whole other industry, because of course then you've got the opportunity to show and demonstrate the plant in real life that you haven't got that opportunity in the garden centre per se, or in a mail order catalogue. So there's so many little niches to this kind of new plant development world that we don't often see. So,
That's exciting.
it's great to talk about.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Another striking quote, my close relationship with the industry gives me a heightened awareness of what consumers want and how they can get it. So, what is it consumers want?
Well, I think it obviously changes, but I feel very privileged to have built a good kind of family on social media over the years. And I felt like I was an early adopter to social media, like way back when I was at Thomson Morgan, even before being freelance. And I think that gives the industry a real consumer insight as well into what the consumer wants. And sometimes what the consumer wants, I'm sorry to say, is at odds with what the industry wants to provide. So one of the examples is when you imagine plants that are sold in garden centres. Like I mentioned before, they've got to be short, in flower when they're kind of like young, to give that impulse purchase for the consumer, and kind of like they're just going to pick them up, they're going to perform straight away.
Yeah.
But that's sometimes a bit unrealistic, because the consumer actually wants a big, bumptious plant that kind of fills a border, looks quite wild and botanical, but they're not the ones that are tidy and look good on the garden centre bench. They're not the ones that kind of transport well, because, you know, you'd need more space between the shelves, it would cost more to transport them, etc., etc. So kind of sometimes there can be disconnects between what the consumer really wants in their garden, but what the industry wants to provide as well. And kind of the more we see, the more we look at that, the more we can satisfy consumers too. I think there's some ways around it. I think we could sell in the garden centre smaller plants of things, which would actually be, this is a whole kind of big change, but like you could go much smaller, which means that you would then need to have, in effect, a living label in the garden centre. So you'd have a plant that is in flower in the centre of the bench, and then the baby plants around the side.
So you see what it becomes.
Yeah, exactly. But that would actually be a lot cheaper for growers to produce, because they're not having to bring them up to what we would call a finished plant in bloom. They're actually selling the smaller plants, but the consumer can see what they grow into. The consumer always also gets that little bit of joy of growing themselves. So I think like this halfway house is kind of somewhere the industry should really explore, to be honest, because it could be interesting for everyone. And
Sure, and it's
you
part
can really
of the
open it up.
magic to see the plant grow, of course.
Totally. And you'll start to be able to give the consumer what they're really looking for as well. And there's obviously a lot of demands now from not just consumer, but through the media as well, for more sustainable options, you know, plants that are much better for pollinators as well. There's a movement in being less tidy in the garden. So indeed, those larger, more botanical plants kind of not being too tidy with the garden at the end of the season. So then we can move our focus to plants that have got beautiful seed heads, kind of like winter colour as well. So it's changing. The garden is becoming much more natural here and there as well. So yeah, there's a few changes.
So if that would be a trend right now, the garden becoming more natural, what should florists focus on for the coming year?
Really kind of moving towards that more wild look and kind of embracing that. And, you know, and I think this kind of, you know, indeed floristry is not my area, but I feel like this does cross over into it. And you are seeing more bouquets that have that more bohemian look here and there. And kind of, I think people have become more sophisticated in the flowers and plants that they choose, perhaps. And people are seeing more online. They're seeing more on social media. So then no longer can you just give people what you want to give them. People are also making that choice themselves a little bit. And social media has opened up all of these different channels. And I think for all the bad parts of social media that we might focus on, I think it's really given more people a voice, more people know things, and kind of especially for plants. Yeah. You know, not even since 2020, because this started maybe in 2018. Plants, you know, starting to become more recognised and becoming mainstream, and you'll see plants in, you know, clothes shops. You'll even see them used in like the Gucci fashion show that was back in Tate Modern late last year. And so plants have really become mainstream, and this is a golden time for us. And people's interest in plants is as stronger than it's ever been, which is something I always wished for.
Yeah,
so it's great.
Lovely. Talking about plants, people having plants in their homes, plants being popular, you established the Gardening School, a platform that provides knowledge through courses, tutorials, and resources for gardeners or future gardeners. Why did you feel the need to bring more education into the gardening world?
Well, I did something I do like. The Gardening School is a part of my website, which a lot of people these days see websites as old-fashioned, but no, because I believe you need to really provide for a range of different demographics and different consumers. And there is, with my work in the UK with like shopping TV, the consumer is kind of like 55 to 65, a very certain demographic who enjoy still browsing on a website. And so I believe I can appeal to a lot of different demographics at the same time. So I kind of do that. And so the gardening school was really an expanded part of my website where it gave a lot more tutorials, kind of really broke down some of the phrases that we tend to use in horticulture. So you'll know that WTF, you know what that stands for, but I won't say that out loud on a podcast. But there's a section of the website called WTF Gardening. And that is really breaking down all of these phrases. So it's like, well, mulch. What is mulch? We hear the word mulch, and
what is it?
Sometimes we forget that the consumer doesn't know what these things mean, or even simple phrases like place your plant in bright indirect light. Let's pull apart what that means, because as horticulturists we forget and we just use these phrases. So what the WTF gardening section of the garden school does is try and break down that and make it really, really simple, and not in a way that we think we're making it simple, but really taking it back to basics and helping people to feel confident as well. Because I think what really goes against us in horticulture is we kind of make it look like some dark art sometimes, because we don't share enough. I think maybe as horticulture as the industry, we feel undervalued. So, that's a whole other issue in itself, but that is why we don't push it forward and feel confident about it. But the more we do that, the more we can open up to consumers, and they'll come with us for the journey and feel confident about what they grow and excited and want to try again, because they always blame themselves. When a plant dies, they always blame themselves, and that breaks my heart, because they don't have to do that. It's what people also forget, like looking around the houseplants here, is none of these plants want to be indoors. People forget that. These are happier in the rainforest. But we've adapted them to houseplants, and it's funny that a consumer always blames themselves, and I want to stop that a little bit, because that's not the way to move forward.
That's very nice of you.
Oh, thank you.
Talking about different platforms, so you have your website, but I guess you use different platforms for different audiences?
Yeah, and it's really interesting, because I find that you cannot cross-fertilize those audiences, because I've got this very loyal following that is the 55 to 65 female, watches QVC, goes on a website, uses Facebook, If I say, come and listen to my podcast or come and read my Substack, they zero interest. They're comfortable where they're comfortable. So you should never try and move people around. Work with them where they're comfortable. So they're very happy in Facebook. They know how it works. They're like, la, 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 la. But then you've obviously got another audience, which is then more kind of Instagram, which is then more visual, kind of a bit more exciting, a bit more cutting edge. So kind of like you've always got these separate audiences, and you almost can never appeal to everyone at the same time, but you can have multiple personalities. And that's kind of how it has worked over the years, which is really interesting and certainly not how I planned it, but it works. And you have to go with how it naturally works. Otherwise you're just always fighting against the tide, and it doesn't make sense to do that. Yeah.
I understand. Yeah. Let's talk about plant marketing. You weren't always into plant marketing and PR. But after a year's sabbatical in Australia, you returned with a focus for new product development, PR, marketing and media. Why did you want to focus on those aspects of the industry?
Yeah, so when I first joined Thomson Morgan when I was just 18 years old, I was kind of like slowly learning kind of like the different parts of the company and introducing the new varieties. And indeed, I had a year traveling around Australia, New Zealand, gives you new perspective. And when I came back, I wasn't just working more in the marketing, but I was also working on the video production as well. And something we used to do at Thomson Morgan that's quite unique and isn't done at all now, because I guess platforms are different, but we would produce a video catalogue. So usually we would send out a paper catalogue, but once a year we'd produce a video catalogue that later moved to DVD. And this was presented almost like in a shopping TV style, but even more sophisticated, to send to the consumer. So the consumer then puts this video on at home. It's just 50 minutes, and it presents the contents of the catalogue to them. And it was very, very interesting. And I'd love to see some of these things revived, because I've always got this theory. Most of the things we did at Thomson Morgan were not necessarily ahead of their time, but they worked in the time. But you could do it all again now with a very different audience. With social media audience, Instagram, which is really, really interesting. So marketing, I believe marketing is never necessarily a new idea. It's recycling ideas to different audiences in different ways, which is really, really exciting. So, and so I was starting to work on the production there and like helping to put together the videos, which then oddly, coming from being terribly shy into my even late 20s, I was then pushed to go onto QVC, Shopping TV, and talk about one of the products that we were selling. Because my boss at the time, and this is why I like to cheerlead people, because I had a boss who pushed me into everything. And at the time, that was super annoying. But actually, I sit here now and I'm so thankful.
Yeah.
Because you've got to have someone cheerleading you, telling you that you can do it. And you can always do it. Do you know what I mean? How often do you do something and then it fails? Honestly, it's just, it always works. And so I was starting to work on the production behind the scenes and then being pushed into doing a little bit of TV. And because I was the guy that was introducing the products, so I was the best guy to talk about those products on these shows. And it was really cool. And I was so nervous for probably the first couple of years. But these things, you get used to them. You always get to. You're not going to stay nervous for like 2 years of doing a job. You know, you're going to mold into it and you'll forget yourself. So that kind of pushed me a little bit into the media world. And I never wanted to work in TV, never really comfortable with that kind of like being in that sort of environment necessarily. But like when you're passionate about something, you're doing it and you want to talk about it. And that is why people want to book you to do those jobs as well. So and so I was then asked to do different like daytime shows and this and that, talking about new plants. And I've done that for many years now, always trying to bring in something new, different, unique as well. And also quite unusually to bring in new plants that are brought into the industry, because I find like with the mainstream media, it's very easy to always go to the tried and tested varieties and kind of the things that are recognized. But let's push the envelope a little bit each time and kind of support the industry, but also show something new to the consumer. Because, you know, the consumer's growing the same old plant all the time with varying results. You know, if you look at lavender, for example, you know, the older variety Hidcote is actually a load of old rubbish and it doesn't perform that well. And there are newer varieties, but they're just not being pushed out there, and the consumer just knows this Hidcote name so well. But the other ones could easily be pushed forward and kind of like promotion could be done on that, and they would actually have a much better plant that keeps them a lot happier as well. So it's really, I want to see more of that, and that is obviously part of the whole mission that I have now, to kind of push new, different, unusual plants to people and to give them better results, give them confidence as well, you know.
So that would be one of your recommendations for garden centres, to push new plants?
Yeah, absolutely, to showcase new plants a lot more, but they've got to be plants that perform, but it's not always about new genetics, it's about forgotten genetics sometimes as well, or promoting plants in different ways. You know, at Thompson & Morgan, we introduced a lot of new plants, but we also completely reframed plants that people already knew. So we invented climbing petunias. They were ground cover petunias that we sent upwards in a frame. So suddenly what goes out will go upwards. So 6-foot petunias, lovely fragrance, great for the patio.
Yeah.
Tree lilies, which is an invention that kind of came through from the US, but using a lot of old Dutch cut flower varieties. So when you grow in a glass house, lily varieties, lovely tall varieties, big long stems so you can cut them for the bouquet. But when you plant those into the garden, you actually get this lovely big tall lily that is great for the consumer, because everyone loves something tall in the garden because it gives privacy, kind of instant hedge, all of this jazz. 6-foot lilies, really easy to grow. And we actually gave those older cut flower varieties like an extra lease of life after they'd kind of been decommissioned as cut flower types, as tree lilies. And so that was a completely new area of plants for people to grow.
Yeah.
Not new genetics at all, but reimagining genetics that were already in there as well. So there's so much potential, and growing things in different ways. You know, I've done a lot of work in Japan over the years with different styles of container and kind of thinking outside the box with the type of plants that are then used and in different ways. And I'm addicted to new ideas. Yeah. It's really cool.
Yeah, okay. What are your top 3 recommendations for plant suppliers to help their customers achieve better sales positions and improve their own results?
In a garden centre or mail order, or across all of it, really?
Depends, yeah.
Yeah, I would say really, talking generally, I would say help the consumer, educate the consumer, because you'd be surprised that the lack of education that is there, and also not the lack of education because it feels like you're blaming them, but the lack of confidence that is there. Yeah. Show them the results, the proof of the results. So if I am kind of like banging on and saying like Hidcote is not the best lavender, then I need to show them the results. I've got to prove to them. So let's show it in a trial field compared to a newer variety, you know, and also sell the dream. I think consumers need to be shown how to use things as well. You know, just on Instagram this morning, I put up some posts of Princettia, which is like an outdoor poinsettia. So I've shown it kind of being used in an outdoor setting. You kind of got to show, because if you're not into plants or you haven't got experience, it's hard to visualize how you could use those plants here and there. So yeah, that's kind of what I'd really recommend across the board. And that works with all channels, whether you're talking TV, garden centre, floristry, mail order, paper catalogue as well. So,
help people pick
definitely
the right plants.
Yeah, because we are going through a golden age for horticulture, and there are so many new faces coming into garden centres that we need to harness that, and make the most of it, and not kind of lead them to disappointment by whatever route,
Picking the wrong plants.
Yeah. But also, more importantly, it's about not just inspiring them to grow plants and be excited by it, but to inspire them to take a career in the industry as well, because that is one of the routes in, and that is something that we do need to focus on too. So the more confident they are with plants, the more they might be like, I could work with this, or that would be nice. So
beautiful.
That could be cool.
In your opinion, what will be essential for suppliers, garden centres and florists to focus on over the next 2 years? Do you believe it's enough to continue doing the things they've been doing it as they always have, or is there a shift happening?
I think obviously sustainability is always a big question.
Yes.
And I think there's a way to communicate that to the consumer, and I don't know if that's always done as proficiently as it could be. I mean, talking from UK, peat-free compost soils, for example, there's a lot of education needed for the consumer, because we have to change the growing medium, a growing medium that needs a bit more feeding, a bit more moisture retention as well, and the consumer is easily going to fail if they don't follow these rules. But I feel like, talking especially from UK, we're not good at making things clear, and we kind of get a little bit tied up in lots of emotion and opinions, and really, I don't see this yet, but I really want to see a brand or a supplier to really break that down clearly and explain to the consumer what peat-free compost is, how to work with it, kind of that whole package. And I think that's something that needs to be done in the garden centre trade in the UK. Also, kind of when we're talking about sustainability, and I think people are generally getting more aware of planting for pollinators and all of that, which is absolutely fantastic. Mm-hmm. I think we need to keep an eye on maybe bedding plants and pot plants, because I think they could be a little bit at risk of not seeming as sustainable, and kind of I think there's ways to blend those with perennial plants in the garden because they're still great, rich for pollinators as well. But then a plant that you're only going to grow for one season might not be seen as sustainable as one that grows for 3 or 4 seasons. So blending those, kind of the whole family of plants as well, and really kind of planting for good and explaining to people why we are doing that as well. And obviously different materials that we use, and kind of switching to that where possible, and making sure the consumer knows, and if something is recyclable, that the consumer is then encouraged to do that as well. So
exactly,
a lot of different messages that I guess all come back to the main stem of sustainability, really, and the environment.
Your social media platforms traverse the whole supply chain, giving the trade access to real-time florists and gardeners. Do you think it's something the industry struggles with, connecting florists, garden centres and so on, the communication between all of them?
Yeah, it's strange, because we live in a world where everyone's got access to everyone, which is kind of weird, but it also gives you opportunity. Because I believe sometimes we always see, especially with a platform like Instagram, we see the industry as separate to the consumer, but all eyes are there actually. So as long as you showcase your company well, proficiently, people can see what you're about, then actually it gives consumers a bit of insight into the industry, product to look out for. As I said earlier, it gives the industry a bit of an insight into what the consumer is looking for at the same time as well. And also we forget that, we always think the industry, but, people that work in the industry are also normal consumers that lie on a sofa on a Sunday afternoon and flick through Instagram or TikTok, for example. So you just have to assume that everyone is seeing everything, if you know what I mean, at the same time. So just to make sure that your channels look good, professional, they get your message out there, because the eyes that are there, we've got a lot less patience. So, if I kind of click onto a company and I can't tell what their essence is straight away, then I'm kind of probably not interested, I'm sorry to say, because it's kind of you've got to know, you've got to have it laid out ready for me. And also, if you need to contact a company or order a product, you've got to make that an easy, seamless process as well. So, so just kind of simplifying and the communication. I think, people like me, I guess I've got quite a niche in where I can connect industry to consumer as well, to make sure that kind of they are listening to each other and seeing, because there can be a lot of different people in the chain, and it's amazing how that message does get lost in translation along the way. And I think with social media, we've got the opportunity to kind of like skip a few of those lines.
Yeah.
In terms of communication, not in terms of like how it actually happens in real time, but actually in just showing people what's coming up and stuff and giving tasters. So
you created content for European breeding companies such as Cicata Flowers and Syngenta Flowers, mostly to help people learn about plants. In your work, what information do you focus on? So you've mentioned you take a good picture, the USP. Is there anything particular?
Well, I would say kind of like the content we'll talk about here is like really creating like Instagram reels and that type of content that I've done for Cicata, Syngenta, Bonari, Suntory, for example. And this is really, they give me a product and they want me to, well, I was actually surprised because they want me to communicate it to the user at home, like the consumer, but they also, because I'm known in the industry, they also see it as uplifting the variety in the industry as well. So, and the industry can, when it's a corporate world, it can take itself a little bit seriously. But as someone who's independent, I can add a little bit of jazz to that. And that's kind of completely of my jurisdiction. So that's really fab. And I think the corporates quite like that because it then allows them to kind of have that softer side to them that they couldn't do themselves. But at the same time, it then highlights this product to the consumer, which is great for both channels, really. So this is such a niche that I never could have imagined that I would build, but it's there. And I feel quite uniquely placed with that as well, because there's no one else that would really have that kind of experience on both sides and have that access to consumers. So I guess like one example, and you know, this content can take quite unusual routes as well, such as when I did some content for Platycauldon pop stars for Bonari. And so I was like, well, what can I do to promote this? So I will dress as 5 different pop stars. So I dressed as, I can't remember, was it the blonde one from ABBA? I dressed as Prodigy as well. And I dressed as, what else? I think probably a Spice Girl. And did this video that was based around these pop stars and kind of like then to promote the plant that is pop stars. This is going to get your attention. Do you know what I mean? In a way that kind of like, I like to create content that gives value but is not too advertorial at the same time. So another time I did some content for a herb company and I dressed as 5 different herbs, and it was kind of like this choose your character kind of like footage as well, and that was pretty cool. And obviously working with different products like Syngenta was Pretty Little, which is like little geranium, showing it in lots of different uses, kind of trying to be inventive with those as well, like with the work with the poinsettia, the outside poinsettia. Trying to show this in different settings where the consumer won't have seen that before, give them the wow factor, and just surprise consumers as well. And that's really fun. And my most recent work is with Morel from France with their cyclamen as well. And I did some really unique outdoor containers, which then bring together a lot of my work in Japan with Barakura, with the outdoor planting, different textures, all of this. And sometimes if I can link up 2 trends, that's even better. So many years ago, I did some work for Selector with pink kisses, very famous type of dianthus. And this was bringing together pink kisses in a kokedama ball, which is the moss-covered ball. But I saw a new trend in Indonesia called tanamdama, which was more than one plant in a kokedama planted up together. So I brought together the trend of tanamdama with dianthus pink kisses, and suddenly kind of created this brand new concept in the world that then gets interest on social media, brings together 2 brands that won't know anything about each other, and just new idea and exciting. And that's, I never, you know, you can ask me another question, which I'm going to ask myself actually. Oh, Michael, do you ever worry about competitors? Right. Well, no, not at all, because I think when you've got your own niche, you don't need to look at what other people are doing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because you're just creating along the way.
And so I never really, and that's how it keeps you fresh.
Yeah.
Don't worry about what anyone else is doing. Just do what you do and do it well.
Yeah.
You know?
Wow. Good tip.
I won't ask myself any more questions because that was a bit of an odd voice.
That's good. So it's almost not about the product itself, but it's about everything outside. It's surprising the consumer. It's changing the setting.
Definitely.
It's adding a new environment to it.
Yeah, almost at some point, the product is the less important thing, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
What can florists do, in your opinion, to stay updated with the latest developments on plant varieties or trends in the world and so on?
Well, I would say for myself, not being too in floristry, but floristry, gun centre, mail order, it's really getting out there. And, this week I'm here for the Flora Holland Asmere show, also the IFTF in Weifhauser. And I really want to be here and see the things in real life and talk to the people, see colleagues, people in the industry as well. So you really have to get out there. So it feels like investment. Obviously, it costs expense to be overseas and do this and that, but you just got to be out there and see stuff. And also in a lot of my work at Thomson & Morgan with bringing in the mail order plants, it was really getting behind the scenes as well, seeing what's coming up before it's there. Sometimes when I was at Thomson & Morgan, if I saw a plant at a trade show and I didn't know it already, I felt like that was a weakness, because I felt I should have already known through my relationship and through being behind the scenes in the kitchen as well of the breeders. So it's all about building those relationships, seeing what's coming up, and just having a nice time and having your niche. And also talking earlier, we talked about passion as well. When you've got your passion, it kind of shines through and people want to share with you. And also, this is going to sound so cheesy and you'll be like, get over yourself, Michael. But also, like, just being a nice guy. A lot of people just forget to be nice or decent or do what they say they do or deliver on time. But I found over the years, that is actually weirdly a superpower, even though it shouldn't be. But it really is.
Well, you might have
it's
a superpower.
But it's really strange, just because a lot of people just don't turn up on time, or they don't deliver what they're going to do when they say they will. And it's amazing. Like, you can really get ahead simply by doing what you should do.
Yeah.
It's incredible, really.
So is there anything you want to share with the audience? Some last wisdom?
Oh, gosh.
A little quote?
It's really just be yourself. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Honestly, this is almost like a culmination of everything I've mentioned today. So, just be yourself. Follow your passion, because if you have got a passion, I'm sorry to tell you, but you can't fake it. So follow where your passion is. Also, just follow your instincts. I know this is a really hard thing to do, but you will often, in any decision in life, if you just kind of sit back, concentrate, you usually know what the answer is. We just spend a lot of time avoiding the answer. And so just follow your instinct when it comes to anything, and it will take you on that journey. And your passion will shine through as well. Like I said, be a nice guy, be on time, have a plan, but don't be too vigilant with the plan. I see too many people with like 5-year plans, 3-year plans, and they kind of like very focused, but they're probably kind of going to be a bit lazy and do all the work at the end of year 4, like when you do your homework on a Sunday night when you're at school,
Or missing opportunities.
Exactly. That's exactly. Oh my God, you're really on the same page. This is amazing. Because you miss opportunities, because you kind of get blinkered and you're kind of like, oh, I don't want to get taken off this track. And you're going to miss everything in the laybys that could be really exciting. And people get very stuck on an aim, but you should be able to pivot or even change your aim. But people get very scared of that. So I keep stiff planning to a general minimum. You know what I mean? Because you've got to be able to pivot and change on the way and evolve. Allow yourself to evolve as well as a person. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's cool.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us on the Cinefleur Studio podcast.
No worries.
So we hope you found today's insight valuable for your floral journey. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring conversations, and follow Cinefleur on social media to stay updated on the latest trends and stories in the world of flowers and plants. Thank you so much again.
Wonderful. Thank you.